But I think the main take home is that the private sector is what does this. There's no other way except to get businesses growing. So even as you think about tax policy, even as you think about incentives, everything you do must be designed to businesses growing. Small businesses getting bigger, medium businesses getting large. That's how you turn things around.
Your jigsaw puzzle is amazing, by the way. It's so clear for me.
How everything is fitting.
Yeah, how everything is fitting, but even the context of time. And the reason why I say that is because you've said Manhattan, you've said 2001.
Very good.
So for me,
you're listening.
Yeah, I mean the story. I mean
something is about to happen, right?
Exactly. I'm just like, okay, what's about to happen?
Yeah.
So like, as much as you're flourishing, your world's about to change.
That's right. Because one morning, on a Tuesday morning in September, I come into my job, and the office window was looking down towards the south. So I used to look over the World Trade Center, down Manhattan. So I come in one morning very early. I tended to come, I'm a morning person, so I came in at 8, and I looked out of the window, and I'm like, wait, there's smoke coming out of the building. And there wasn't anybody else here, like many people in the office. So I saw that, and then I thought, this is not right. It really looks like something just told me it wasn't right. So we went out, and I started talking to the other people, and people started exiting the building, because immediately we could connect that this was not going to work. So even though, I mean, I didn't see it much after the plane hit, but it had just hit by the time now that I left. So I left the building, and we went down. By the time we started now looking at other people, because now people were congregating in the streets looking at screens, trying to understand what's happening. Then it had come that actually a plane actually drove into. So everybody knew now this is terrorism, right? And now it's very frightening, because MetLife was also a signature building. So it could have been that we're next, who knows? Because if they're targeting tall buildings. So we came out, and now we're all coming out of people are streaming out of the building, not in a panicked way, but just because by now we don't know. And I was now living on 96th Street, which is way up in Manhattan on the Upper East Side, and where we work is on the 44th Street. So I now started walking home. And by now, we're milling around, and people are beginning to mix. And then the second plane hit.
Wow.
Then that's when everybody knew. So they started shutting down the subways, because now we don't know the extent. We just know we're under attack, right? They stopped the buses, they stopped everything. And then now people started going. And you remember, when you're coming into the office in the morning, you have your briefcase and your high heels. That's your decor. So now I have to walk from 45th to 96th.
In high heels.
Yeah, so now we start going into shops to try and buy slippers at the last minute, little cheap things just to get home. You go in, everything has been bought.
Wow.
And then a short while later, we start seeing people walking now from downtown covered in ash.
Wow.
Like just this very haunting image that I'll never forget, right? So everybody's walking silently up. Then now, trucks, but people who have buses and things now start to extort, because now there's very few, and some people need to be carried, people in wheelchairs, so they start telling you, okay, $20, $50,
no way.
$100. So it just becomes impossible to find even a cab or anybody to stop you. So now you start walking. So I walked all those blocks all the way up home with other people. And
in context, that's how many kilometers?
It's hard to say, but a block, I don't know how to say that. Yeah, but it took an hour.
A couple of blocks.
Many blocks, 45 blocks. You're very naughty. So now we get there, but now you can see the news has spread all over the world, you can imagine. So now everybody's trying to call. My parents are trying to find me. Everybody's trying to find out where is this person, and is she safe? Yeah, so it really took a lot by the time you call them and tell them, I'm okay, don't worry, I'm in my house, and it's going to be okay. But yes, I was there on that day, and it was right in my purview.
Wow.
Yeah.
For 98 Bomb Blast Kenya, I didn't have a conversation with you about it because you were not in the country that time. Yeah.
I heard about it like the others.
Yes, but this one now, you are in the... Literally, what you said, it could have been your building. Your building is a potential target for that.
Yeah.
So how does that now, and that is a turning point in America's, what's the word? it changed even the freedoms of America.
It sure did.
Yes.
And also the trust, right? It just became, it changed a lot. It also started a recession, or at least a downturn, let's put it. Because now people didn't know what to do, and there was so much uncertainty, and there had been a tech boom, which is what I kind of described until then, and that became a time when it started to really cool off. So it really affected that as well.
So are you working the days after that?
Well, I mean, the clients were still there, but the mood was there. So for a couple of days, people were told just stay home as we try to figure out what this thing is. Because remember, then we're hearing there are planes in the sky that are being attacked. Then the Pentagon has been, you know, so it took a few days before everything settled, and you're all glued to your TVs, right? So people were given days off. But after that, it didn't take very long for the law firms to start saying, you know, we really need to, you know, to cut down. We don't know what's happening here. This was fine for me because I had already now started making a transition, because I wanted, after 2 years of this experience, to now move home. Instead of the 3 years of my father, but to now move home and start building a life here. So I had already qualified for the New York bar, which is famously difficult. So I qualified for the New York bar. I'm also qualified in Washington, D.C. to practice law there. But now I knew I wanted to come home and qualify in Kenya as well and start a life here. So soon after that, I started to transition back to Kenya. But the other thing that had happened that was new, very soon after, was the change in government. So a lot of people did also come home as Kibaki was sworn in. It was that time.
Were you alone at this time in?
Yes, I was alone in New York.
You were alone?
I was alone, yes, very much so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so
a short while later, my mother came to check, because I think when people are overseas, they think people say we're okay, but she came to see with her own eyes,
which is
so
amazing.
That was very sweet. But over time, eventually, I started now getting ready for I had kind of finished what I had come to do. Loved my time in the US, and it's as you can see, it's a big foundation of who I am, and I feel that in many ways. While as a teenager, you know, every teenager has challenges and all that. I feel like I really came into my own in that kind of 18 to 22 time. My college life is what really brought me out with my talents, my ambition, my early work life. That period was very, very inspiring for me and helped me set me on a path that is great to this day.
When did you come back home? What year?
I came in 2003.
Okay.
To Kenya.
What I want to hear, what were you hearing about Kenya that made you hopeful about coming home?
I think, now I can't tell you at that time what I was hearing, but definitely coming home, and you know, a lot of diaspora came home at that time. It wasn't just me. Was a sense of hope. So even as that transition happened, of course, after the election, now we knew we could do it. But really, hordes of people came, and it just felt like opportunity. And indeed, that did end up being true. For very many years, we really did have a boom.
I asked that in context with where we are today. I feel like the moods of the country is maybe the 2001 before Kibaki came in. And just to be candid and honest, it's, if you were to be, I think at that time Kenyans were rated the most hopeful individuals in the world.
After, yes.
But I think right now that definitely we are not there. But I'm asking this in context with, is it possible for us to get to that place where you came back home with that mood?
Oh, absolutely. Because what that told me, I'm such a believer, I have such faith that we turned around the economy together in a very short period of time. It was done by the hard work of the people. So of course, leadership and policy, politics matters very much. But once that lays the foundation, what we saw is that Kenyans, and I'll speak about Kenyans specifically, it's not always the case for every country, but this particular population are a hard-working entrepreneurial group, and it's in our DNA. So once the space was created, we saw incredible things. And you remember, gradually over time, we ended up getting to a 7% growth rate per annum. That's something that if you sustain, you can change lives, turn around things incredibly. So we have, and it came from a very low base. We thought all was lost. But as soon as the space was open, the democratic space, private credit, there's a number of things you do to get the macroeconomics right.
Yes.
And we saw this flourishing. And it can happen again. It happened in a short time from a time that was very challenging. So it can happen again. And that's why I think a lot of people still believe that there's hope, that this is something we can turn around very quickly if we are united and we know where we're going.
Wow. You know, you've made me make sense of the number. Sometimes the finance world throws the numbers out, not understanding that 7% doesn't sound good. That's 7.
Oh my goodness, for growth
if I got a 7% in my exam, I'm in trouble.
No, a sustained rate of 4+.
That's not what you
great.
said. You gave an example of Singapore in context of what they sustained of 4%, hence to where they're getting there. 7%.
Poland.
Poland. Poland. So when you talk about 7%, what you're saying that's incredible on its own.
It was very good. Ideally, you know, in the way the Vision 2030 had envisioned it, is that, you know, if you look at China, India, some of these countries, they go to 9. China is much higher than that. People debate about whether the numbers are really valid. But the fact is, if you grow at 10%, that's what we should be growing at in order to keep up with our population and to meet all these targets that we have. Right. So, but I think the main take home is that the private sector is what does this. There's no other way except to get businesses growing. So even as you think about tax policy, even as you think about incentives, everything you do must be designed to businesses growing. Small businesses getting bigger, medium businesses getting large. That's how you turn things around.
Okay. Is there any other possible way of turning a country around outside of private sector economic growth as the main pillar?
We have not seen it on this planet unless some aliens are going to come and demonstrate
unless God
for
makes
us.
it rain money. But even if it does, it's inflation.
Exactly. No. You don't get around from supporting business. You don't get around that.
Wow.
Yeah. And you do it by creating an environment. You look at the credit. You look at the exchange rate. It's the same. There's no, external magic. It's the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And you run government efficiently so that services are delivered for the people.
Governments, you know what I'm hearing you say? It's government's job is to make the country and the environment conducive for business to happen and for people to get mandatory services.
Bottom line.
Huh?
Bottom line, that's it. It's to facilitate.
Wow.
That's the role of government.
You know,
and even policy. Everything is for that. And then when the private sector grows, we're able to pay all the taxes you want. Then you can do all the wonderful things. But if there's no tax base, where's your money coming from? I mean, you can borrow, but it still has to be paid back.
Yeah.
You can get from donors, but how much? And in fact, we had reached a point where our budget was mostly self-financed. Donors should be optional. You can't be living on, it's just like the way you run your house. You can't be living on Madeni, You need to be, Yeah, you need to have a plan, right? And to support your children and to live within your means.
So at the height of the Kibaki government, he got the economy to a place where the country was, let's say, what percentage was coming from the taxes to survive, to live off.
Yes, so we got to a point where our debt to GDP ratio had reduced. And from there, we also made sure that the percentage of our revenue, a percentage of our revenue that was going into development as opposed to debt servicing was higher.
Wow.
So now you can make investments into free primary education. You can start getting into infrastructure. You can start making investments in the people. But the first thing to do is to generate revenue, because you have to have money to start all of this.
What did he do that was just mind-blowing that to generate revenue? Get carry in order, begin collecting taxes?
Yeah, but you have to collect them from somewhere.
From the business. that is making money.
Back.
Or for people's salaries.
Yeah, so we can look at, there's some principles. I mean, it's a big discussion, so we can't go into that. But things that you can do is to make private credit available. So people need to be able to borrow. And as the government, if the government is always borrowing from the markets, it can crowd out the private sector, meaning that everybody could start lending to the government through government securities and all of these different things.
Yes.
Yeah, I know
that's what happened.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
I mean, I had 17%.
It was very good. It was very tempting.
So why am I giving me? I'm going to give the government my money so that they can give me back.
Yeah. So it's about supporting, providing credit for business. It's about making the environment in such a way that that regulations are additive. You're not just regulating so that you can extract fees from business and the like, right? At the same time, it's important to, and some of these things we're seeing happening now, right? There's also ways in which we can make sure that we start attracting private investment from across the world, right? So when you create a conducive environment, all of these things start to happen. They happen quite organically because capital is looking for places to go. Now, there's ways to balance it. You have to make sure that, sometimes there have been experiences in Asia and elsewhere where when the private capital comes too much, you can become dependent in such a way that if it exits very quickly, you're also left, stumbling a little bit. So there's ways to balance all of this. And that's what the people in charge of macroeconomic policy do, is to make sure even when an economy starts to speed up, it doesn't now lead to inflation. You have to manage that, which also has implications for interest rates and how you balance those. So all of this has to be looked at. However, what we do know is that at the core of it, from what we have seen in the past, is that by supporting business, especially small businesses to grow and medium businesses to get bigger, as I've said before, you will find that the rest takes care of itself.
I get it.
Yeah, and with good policies, you can make sure that now the tax revenue that you get, you're able to attract, you're able to direct to good investments that now make it a virtuous cycle where now businesses do even more, they pay even more, and then now you're off to the races. The other piece of this, though, which you had mentioned before, is about service delivery. So even as you're doing all of this and you get this tax revenue, how do we make sure that our public service is fit for purpose? There's two parts. One is just hygiene, making sure that graft is reined in, there's not a lot of waste. All of that is basic bottom line. And then from there, now it's things like performance contracting that came in at that time, which is just to make sure that a person is hired for a job to do, they're held accountable for that job. We eradicate this stereotype that government officials leave their jacket on the chair and then go to their real job. You really want to make sure that the public service starts to become a talent magnet, a thing that is seen as prestigious and aspirational for me to work for government. And the way you do that is not just by pay and other things, but it's also by making sure that people grow professionally there and that their contract shows them how they're growing and the contribution that they're making. So it's accountability, but it's also support, which is a very key principle when you support workers in any organization. Accountability with support to perform.
Wow.
Yeah, so all of those different things come into the mix, but what we know about Kenyans from our experience in the past is that if you do your part, Kenyans will do their part.
In very layman terms, provide a conducive environment for the individual to begin generating revenue so that they can get off their Fuliza and Tala and branch.
Exactly.
But now make it macro for a government level. For it anyway. I'm laughing, but I'm also not laughing because it's true. Income begins coming into people's lives.
Exactly. And it's at the individual level as they strive, then all of us start to benefit. Right now, I'm not trying to minimize some of the challenges that have happened since, right? So even as we stand today, there's been a global, COVID is one. And in fact, some of the statistics show that COVID took out some 30% of wealth from Kenyans at the household level that has never really come back.
Wow.
We're still reeling from it. And it had impact on workplace cultures, people's mental health. I mean, COVID was still not over. And there's things like that. And then now the debt burden that we have is partially because of global factors. But I guess the question becomes, now that we're here, what next, right? And how do you go about getting yourself out of this hole? And that's why there's I think a discussion to be had about how we can unite behind one thing where there's consensus. about how we're going to get ourselves out
Okay.
of the mess we're in. Yeah. The other thing I should add is that in many countries, this conversation is happening, right?
Okay.
So in countries like ours, where there's still a lot of growth ahead, you know, because we're still a relatively poor country, the conversation is about what development model do we use that is shared growth and green growth, right? Because the way some of these Western countries are developed, we can't do that now. We know much more. It can't be coal and dirty fuels and, you know. On the other hand, we want to make sure, even with them, they grew with extreme inequality, right? So their time was different. So with us, we want to have very fast growth. We want to be productive people. Some of the rhetoric that people use in the West, we can't use here. We're not in the same, you know, people go on Twitter and they start talking, they read about quiet quitting and all these funny things. And then they say, now this is going to be my life. I'm like, you're in Africa. Can we, let's talk about where we need to go from the base we're operating on, right? So there's that has to kick in, right? But if we put all of that together, then we can start moving in a direction that we want to do, that is accelerated growth, but that learns from the lessons and the mistakes of some of these other economies.
One of the questions that I like asking leaders is, especially private sector leaders in Kenya, is the environment conducive for you to have open, honest conversations with the public sector, in this case with government? So it's wonderful that you have, where I'm hearing, you're this brilliant mind, but is government, are you able to sit down on the table and have peer-to-peer conversations with government, and are they listening?
Because
the solutions
I would answer
are here.
that.
Okay, are you going to answer later?
No.